As we saw, there are many types of graphs, but there are certain characteristics that allow us to describe graphs. Let's go over them. One thing that you really want to get yourself familiar with is the idea of directed and undirected graph. These types of graphs are useful for describing traffic flow, for example, of some kind of a system in which movement is not bidirectional. That means, unlike here where I can go back and forth between nodes, I can only go in one direction. A good way to think about undirected graph is to think of as a highway between two cities where you can go back and forth. On the other hand, directed will be a one-way street where you can only go one way. Another way to think about it is Facebook. What kind of graph do you think Facebook has? Well, it has an undirected graph because when I'm connected to a friend, that friend is also connected to me. It's not one way. What about Twitter? Twitter is more directed because if I have my profile, people can follow me and I can follow people, but if somebody follows me, I don't automatically follow them. So Twitter is more directed. Another way to describe graphs is the idea of weighted graphs, unweighted and weighted graphs. And as you can see from the images, values can be applied to various aspects of a graph, not just the nodes. Remember, the nodes can carry any type of information, but with graphs, you can also have information in the edges, in the connections. Maybe you're going on a trip and trying to figure out the most efficient way to visit sites that interest you. Well, in that case, Google Maps would use a weighted graph to decide what is the shortest path for you to get there. And these sort of graphs are used a lot in calculating optimal paths, the fastest way to get to, let's say, 1 to 6. Lastly, another way to describe a graph is cyclic or acyclic. When you have vertices connected in a circular fashion, it's called a cycle, when you can go from one node to another, and then back to that original node, versus acyclic, where you can't do that. And cyclic graphs are really common in especially weighted graphs, such as Google Maps, because most of the time, there is a way to get back. So now that we understand a few ways to describe graphs, let me show you my favorite graph of all time. This is my favorite graph. It's by the Opti project, and it is a partial map of the internet. If you look here, you see that we have IP addresses connecting to IP addresses, and these are all nodes connected to create the internet. Pretty spectacular, right? That is the best example of a graph. So now that we understand, or at least have a basic understanding of graphs, let's do a nice fun exercise.